You're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Benny Golson, his life and times and best hits. Benny Golson was a leading saxophonist and composer from the Hall of Fame of Jazz. He wrote several compositions that have become classics today, from Stablemates to Blues March to Park Avenue Petite and more. Golson hailed from Philadelphia. In high school, he played with several other musicians like John Coltrane, Jimmy Hart, Philly Joe Jones and Red Rodney. In the 1950s, Golson toured and performed alongside the bands of Lionel Hampton, Earl Bostic, Dizzy Gillespie and Art Blakey. It was alongside Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers that he recorded one of his best albums of all time, Morning. In 1956, he wrote one of his iconic compositions, I Remember Clifford, as a tribute to the great jazz trumpet who passed away in a car accident that year. Several other jazz compositions followed in the years to come like Stablemates, Whisper Not, Along Came Betty and Park Avenue Petite that have gone on to be performed and recorded by many musicians. In 1995, Golson was awarded the NEA Jazz Masters Award from the National Endowment of the Arts. So that was some insight into the life and times and best compositions of Benny Golson. More details coming up. Also coming up, some trending festival and album news. Stay tuned to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva to find out more. We'll be right back after some music. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Benny Golson, his life and times and best compositions. During this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. Benny Golson was a leading saxophonist and composer of his time. Many of his compositions have gone on to become jazz classics today like Stablemates, Along Came Betty, Whisper Not and more. He was born on January 25, 1929 in Philadelphia. While he was in high school, Golson took up music full-time and started touring and performing alongside other musicians like Red Garland, Jimmy Hart, Philly Joe Jones and Red Rodney. Throughout the early 50s, Golson toured and performed alongside the bands of Lionel Hampton, Todd Dameron, Dizzy Gillespie and Art Blakey. It was alongside Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers that he recorded one of his best albums of all time, Morning, in 1958. In the years that followed, he also composed several award-winning compositions like Whisper Not, Park Avenue Petite, I Remember Clifford and more. In 1959, he took over Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers band for a while. After that, he started focusing on orchestral work for a decade. During this time, he would compose for film and TV programs like Ironside, Mission Impossible and Room 222. His compositional style was very complicated and melodic and was based off the styles of John Coltrane. In the mid-70s, he returned to the jazz scene, and in 1982, he reorganized his former ensemble, the Jazztet. In 1995, Golson was awarded the NEA Jazz Masters Award from the National Endowment for the Arts. He also had an appearance in the 2004 movie The Terminal. In October 2007, Golson received the Mellon Living Legend Legacy Award presented by the Mid-Atlantic Art Foundation at a ceremony at the Kennedy Center. Additionally, during the same month, he won the University of Pittsburgh International Academy of Jazz Outstanding Lifetime Achievement Award at the university's 37th Annual Jazz Concert in the Carnegie Music Hall. In 2021, Golson was awarded the Grammy Trustees Award. Benny Golson died on September 21, 2024, leaving behind a legacy as one of the greatest composers in jazz. Harvard University, where he graduated from, created a special award as a tribute to his legacy, called the Benny Golson Jazz Master Award in 1996. Over the years, this award has been awarded to several distinguished jazz artists. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Benny Golson, his biography and best compositions. Now let's have some trendy music news. Acclaimed vocalist Kim McGuire has just released a new single called A Case of You. This one's a very iconic song. Kim grew up playing the piano and practicing on her favorite hits. She was inspired by the music of Carly Simon, Johnny Mitchell and Elton John. A Case of You basically reminisces about her childhood and journey to stardom. She says the idea for this song came to her out of the blue. She thought of the song while performing at a concert in Seattle and mentioned it to her bassist Chris Simon. They played the song together at a few concerts and ended up recording it. This song is based on the Johnny Mitchell song of the same name, one that has been a favorite of audiences over the ages. On her cover of this song, Kim puts her own stamp on the song. For more information, please visit www.kimmcguirejazz.com. So that was some trendy music news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we will be talking about more of Benny Golson's best compositions of all time. Stay tuned. You're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, Benny Golson, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best compositions of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. The first one's called Stablemates, released in 1955. This song was composed when Golson was touring and performing in clubs in Massachusetts. One of his favorite haunts was a jazz club called The Stable in a Boston restaurant. Golson wrote this song for one of those performances and named it after the restaurant The Stable. It was one of Golson's earliest compositions and put him on the map as a leading jazz composer of his time. Whisper Not was released in 1956. Golson wrote this tune when he was performing alongside Dizzy Gillespie's band in 1957. The song was originally instrumental, then a few years later, composer Leonard Feather added lyrics. The song is themed around love and heartbreak and reunion. Blues March was released in 1958. Golson was inspired to compose this song from the marching bands of New Orleans. For many years, this song was the theme song for the Jazz Messengers, one of their most popular hits. The instrumentals blend blues rhythms with military cadences. It's a great song from the hard bop genre. And you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's episode, Benny Golson, his life and times and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best compositions of all time. The first one's called Stablemates, released in 1955. This song was composed when Golson was touring and performing in clubs in Massachusetts. One of his favorite haunts was a jazz club called The Stable in a Boston restaurant. Golson would typically have jam sessions with musicians like Herb Pomeroy, Duke Ellington and others during those performances. So the story goes that Herb wanted Benny to write him a few compositions. So he came up with a very unusual song for the group because of its unique rhythm and time signature. Initially, Golson didn't have an idea about what to call the song. Then as he thought about it, he decided Stablemates would be a good name for it, because he and Herb Ellis were stablemates and he had written the song for a performance at The Stable restaurant. The same year, John Coltrane and Miles Davis ended up recording the song. It went on to become a classic. It is one of Golson's earliest compositions and put him on the map as a leading jazz composer of his time. Whisper Not was released in 1956. Golson wrote this tune when he was performing alongside Dizzy Gillespie's band in 1957. They performed that tune later that year. The tune caught on with several jazz artists of the time and became a popular favorite of musicians like Lee Morgan, Art Blakey, Wynton Kelly and others. The song was originally an instrumental, then a few years later composer Leonard Feather added lyrics. And then it became a favorite with vocalists also like Anita O'Day, Mel Torme and Ella Fitzgerald. Feather's lyrics are themed around love and heartbreak and reunion. The opening scene takes us to a landscape of conflicting emotions, a singer singing forlornly about finding love. That sets the stage for the next bit about how finding love is the answer to everything. The song goes on to say that it's about reconciliation and forgiveness. The singer is reflecting on ways he could have approached the matter differently. The theme of Whisper Not is centered on the sentiment, whisper not of past quarrels, but look to the future with hope for new beginnings. Also, the song talks about naysayers, backstabbers, but all that is just an obstacle to the process of finding true love. The song ends with the singer singing about reconciliation. The lyrics go, love will whisper on eternally, and that love is enduring and can weather the storms of negativity. Blues March was released in 1958. Golson was inspired to write this song from the marching bands of New Orleans. The song also is great for improvisation because of its structure and harmony. The song was originally released on the Jazz Messengers album Moanin'. For many years, this song was the theme song for the Jazz Messengers, one of their most popular hits. The instrumentals blend blues rhythms with military cadences. It's also a great song from the hard bop genre. The song's legacy has gone on to inspire several other generations to come. Its combination of style, historical context and virtuosity has secured it a place in jazz history. Golson composed this song to highlight Art Blakey's drumming styles. He figured the best way to do that was to compose a tune based on marching bands. The song was first performed by the Jazz Messengers at a concert hall in New York City. And you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's episode, Benny Golson, his biography and best compositions. Now some trending concert news. The Midwest Jazz Collective is a group of jazz bands from the Midwest. They have announced a tour for this spring. The Midwest Jazz Collective are a compilation of jazz groups hailing from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Michigan, Missouri and Iowa. Their aims and goals include to further the scope of jazz around the Midwest through live tours and performances, to facilitate jazz education around the region through university workshops. So the Midwest Jazz Collective have just announced their first live tour featuring the Benny Benack 3 Quartet. They will be performing from March 22nd to April 10th with Tyler Henderson on piano, Caleb Tobachman on bass and Charles Gold on drums. The tour will also include educational workshops at regional universities. So that was some trending festival news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Benny Golson's best compositions of all time. Stay tuned.